how to increase your revenues through blended financing. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the fundraising school, and I'm joined today by Neelam Makhijani. Neelam is the Director of Strategy and Operations for SUVIDHA, working on various climate and environmental issues, especially in agriculture. And Neelam, thank you so much for being with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Pleasure.
I first met Neelam in the Netherlands at a conference in Noordwijk, where she taught me a lot and the entire workshop session a lot about this whole concept of blended financing. Neelam, what is blended financing?
You know, it sounds very sassy, but just what's the meaning of blended? Bringing few things together. And in this case, bringing different kinds of donors together, funders together, and blending them to get the best results and long-term impact out of it. So blending private capital, government, community, all of that together so that we can create sustainable impact. That's what blended financing is. And therefore, how do you use one piece of investment as catalytic funding to attract the others? That's what blended financing does.
And so certainly traditional fundraising, earned income by selling merchandise or tickets or memberships, government funding, interest if we're able to have some money in the bank, an operating reserve. But also, Neelam, these folks who are coming to us and saying, I'd like to make an investment in your nonprofit, in your NGO. And we're seeing a growth here in the United States and around the world of what some people call impact investing or social venture philanthropy. How can a nonprofit be ready when that person says, I would like to make an investment in your nonprofit, and in addition to the social good, I want a financial return back? How does that work?
It's actually, that's what's fascinating about this, Bill. You know, we are so used to in the nonprofit sector of getting a grant and then just implementing and God willing, you'll deliver as much as you can and you'll get a nice report. I think this is a game changer. Blended financing is a game changer because in most of the instruments that they have, we have under blended financing, allow us to do the work first and then we get paid. So you see the pressure is on delivery, the pressure is on implementation. Blended financing does not care much about inputs, but more on outputs. The focus is on outputs. So when someone says, and it's a beautiful word, not I want to give you a donation, but I want to invest in your organization. And that's why we as nonprofit leaders, I think we need to promote more. How do we get people interested in our mission, not just a project, but in our mission? And that's where the investment word comes in. So therefore, blended financing, when anyone says, I want to invest, means, of course, I mean, all the rich people, the philanthropists, they have a lot of money and they can certainly get better returns if they, invest in the traditional way. However, by putting it under social impact, they do good and they want some returns. And it's a very fair deal, I would say. So when and there are so many instruments under which they are allowed to do this, whether it's the impact bond, whether it's the guarantees that they can provide, whether they can give revolving funds. So there's lots of that. And I think it's a win-win. The model has to be well designed. That's, I think, the critical piece of it. And of course, the outputs have to be very concrete. So you get paid once you've achieved them. So it can't just be behavior change, For example, how do you measure that? So, and then they get their money, they make small profit on it, but they've done much greater good than they could have by just giving a one-off grant.
Neelam, who are these folks who are making these investments for blended financing as opposed to just making outright philanthropic gifts? Is there something about their age, about their profession, how they made their wealth, how they see economics and NGOs? Who are these folks who are most interested in making these investments?
Well, it's really the philanthropic foundations who have been the front runners in this, and they can do much more. I mean, there is a huge potential for these philanthropic foundations to do more of blended financing. Individual high net worth individuals, of course, can do it. And they don't necessarily need the money back, but even if they did, they would recycle it again. So, your dollar goes way far, way further if they use these instruments to do it. So it's governments can do it, but however, that's not been the case as much. But it's always been philanthropic foundations. USAID used to do a lot of that. Unfortunately, they're not around anymore. But Rockefellers and a lot more philanthropic foundations are the leaders in this area. But high net worth individuals and other philanthropic organizations are supporting a lot of this.
I want to ask you to describe for our audience one of your favorite examples, whether it be a foundation or an individual. A story that I've been telling lately is a nonprofit that I'm associated with, and I think you're going to enjoy this. A donor said, I have $300,000. And this is an NGO that works in a developing neighborhood with neighbors who are lower income, who need housing stability. And the donor said, I'd like to help with that housing stability. The nonprofit went and found a home builder who will build houses at cost for 100,000 USD. So I didn't take a lot of math at Northwestern, but that's 3 houses, right? And so what the NGO is doing is moving 3 families into those houses, 1 into each house. 5 years later, those families will have stability to purchase those houses. They'll have instant equity growing towards that wealth that is so important. But you said the word recycle, and that's where this donor is interested. When the family buys that house, that money goes right back into building the next house. In the meantime, the NGO was receiving rent money from that family, far below market, but just to help them with their household budget. And now 2 other donors have said, I'm going to match that. So $900,000, 9 houses, families pay a little bit of rent. They eventually buy the houses. We build more houses later. That money will last until the earth ends, ideally, right? And those houses will continue being built. This is what we're talking about, folks. We're seeing more and more of this. But Neelam, I wanted to give you also a moment to think, like, what is one of your favorite examples when you've seen this happen?
Well, I've done a few of impact bonds, even they were very good, but I'll give you an example of the revolving fund that you just talked about as well. And we've done this with women. So they wanted to start an enterprise, so we gave them startup money. So it wasn't all of revolving fund, but it had a few bits of a couple of instruments in that. So there were about 500 women we took from urban, just outside Mumbai, and they needed very small amounts, like $300. We're not even talking of 100,000, $300, $400 to just buy goods for a shop, to start a shop outside their house. So very small. And they didn't even have that. So, what they've been doing is selling veggies and it's not giving them the income that they would want. Or if, and some wanted to do some embroideries. One wanted to set up a salon who needed a little bit more. So we gave them that capital. But we didn't give all of it. So if someone wanted, say, $1,000, for example, to set up a whole infrastructure with a salon and a beauty parlor and all of that. So you said, we give you 500. She puts in the 2. Based on that, she went and got a bank loan for 300. So she had all the money. Now, the most interesting part of this blended financing is that she had to return the loan from the bank. So, every month what she made, she had to save that little bit. So it's also putting these women into the mainstream. Otherwise it's hard for them to get loan because they don't have collaterals. Because we gave them 500. Now, we could have also said in another project, we said, whatever we're giving you 500 should also come back to the donor, and who will then revolve it again. So, so you could do that. But in the first instance, we just gave them that as an investment. They put in, 20% of theirs and took a loan. So it was blended because it was her money, it was our money, it was the bank. So that's where blended financing succeeds, is when we get the market capital into the mix. Market capital is the game changer for us to achieve the sustainable development goals. We need to bring this market in. So when the banks were giving them 300, and the only reason she got 300 because she could show 700 of hers. I mean, with 5 of ours. And she paid back little by little. And now for the next time, because she paid it really well and in time, she went back for another 1,000. Now she could get 1,000 instead of the 300. You see, again, so we, through all this blended financing, we are making daily wage earners, etc., credit ready, so that new finance and new capital can be pumped into the programs that are going to work on poverty and eliminate certain hardships of vulnerable communities. So this is what blended the exciting piece of blended financing is.
Neelam, what a wonderful story. And thank you for your leadership in helping that happen and teaching the rest of us. And, two things. First of all, I know if I'm in India, I'm going to call you if I need a haircut, because I know you got some people now who can give me a little trim if I need one while I'm in India, because you got folks that you've helped get started. And it's also a beautiful story that she has built her business. She's paid back the first loan. She's making some profit for herself. Once that first loan is paid off, maybe she stays there. Now she has more profit, or like you said, now she can grow the business and has a track record, a history of doing this successfully. And I also just can't help but think of what is going on in her mentally and emotionally and self-confidence. And I can do this. And I am a leader in my community, in addition to the things that are happening in the business world. It really is this holistic approach to helping people.
Absolutely. And for women, it's the agency. It's the decision making, it's the dignity. I mean, I'll give you a very small example, another one in poultry. And it's, we give these women chicks, 100 chicks, they were only 21 days old chicks. And we said, so we taught them the whole poultry process and then, the whole immunization, etc. And then they had to decide, and they're part of self-help groups, in India and in Bangladesh and others. It's very common for communities, women in a certain community, to come together and form a self-help group. And they sometimes register them as an entity, and they themselves are the leaders of these self-help groups. So, and we give about 100 women that. And each month, and they kind of did their own planning. They wanted to sell the eggs and not the chick. And there were certain times where, of course, they got hats on themselves. But then they decided that. And there were so many women and every month, if they made like $200, they would take home 100, spend another 50 on reinvesting and buying new chicks. You see, so this is amazing. It can do miracles. And the women, the confidence, the dignity, and of course, agency to make decisions at home, and the children do much better. We've seen this as an absolute track record. It is the first person who benefits from all of this are the children. So they do much better. They go to schools, they don't have to do, and child labor is addressed. So all of that. And there's so much less exploitation of women, because in India, migration is a major issue. So if we can create small enterprises for them and create more entrepreneurship ideas out of them, they don't have to migrate. They stay with their families and they're safe.
And those kids are watching mom and saying, what business am I going to start someday? And hopefully that continues to pass along. So Neelam, I want to ask you, we've talked about the investor, foundations, high net worth individuals. A lot of these high net worth individuals, by the way, as I've learned more about this, are people who are entrepreneurs. They've been successful themselves in business. They bring that entrepreneurial mindset into working with NGOs. We've talked about the recipients in beautiful ways. Help us understand the NGO, the nonprofit. They're used to traditional fundraising. I'm going to meet an individual, cultivate a relationship, ask for gifts. I'm going to meet foundations, write grant proposals, hope to be funded, get some corporate sponsors, all of these types of things. What needs to be true about the NGO, about the nonprofit, to have the capacity to receive these types of investments, help facilitate these types of funds on behalf of the recipients? What needs to be true about them? What type of skills do they need to have? What type of capacity needs to be in place? What's your advice for nonprofits?
Well, one, the nonprofit has to be of at least medium size because, there are risks when you do something like this, right? So there may be a default on a person who you've got the loan for, and then you're part of that trilateral agreement. So one, it has to have certain amount of financial corpus, if I can use that word for it. So as it can. Now, those defaults are very small, but it can happen, right? So one, it has the even bigger need for an NGO to do this, and it's absolutely non-negotiable, is having robust monitoring systems. You have to have very robust, one, a strategy as to why this organized, why you want to do it. And of course, diversifying income base is a very common need for all the nonprofits. You can't just do grants all your life. You need to diversify your income sources. And if this is how the world is thinking about it, you need to think on it, and probably do it small, but then scale. So monitoring systems have to be very good. You have to be technically very strong in whichever area that you're going to. The thematic strength has to be there. So really, if you're technically strong, you have very good monitoring and evaluation systems. And in most of the blended financing instruments, Bill, fund the outcome funder. So if you're doing an impact bond, you have an investor and you have an outcome payer. The outcome payer would like third-party evaluation. So that's also, you have to be ready for something like that. So while the outcome payer might want a third-party evaluation before they pay the investor back their money, you need to also have very strong systems in place. So those are some. And of course, the leadership has to be dynamic.
And where I think first is on our board of directors, that we have people with some business sense who can help us think through this. If all of my history is in the NGO sector, I need that maybe additional business sense on my board. Maybe I need to hire some folks with a little more business sense who understand financing along these ways. But as Neelam said, a strong strategy, the right capacity, at least medium size, to take on this new opportunity, and being able to screen properly because you are taking on some financial risk, and also then robust outcomes. And of course, we're always interested in results, but now we have investors. And Neelam, I remember you talking about this in the Netherlands. That's a healthy thing. A little bit of what we say in the States, feet to the fire. I'm sure in India, there's a colloquialism like that. Just a little healthy pressure can also be a good thing. And that's where that third-party evaluation comes in.
Most certainly. You see, again, when I got into the nonprofit sector, which is nearly 2 decades ago, we are a nonprofit sector organization, small, steady. And if someone asked you for a business plan, you kind of looked at them and say, but I'm not in business, Yeah. But that has shifted. We now do strategies and business plans. So we have to be entrepreneurs. You cannot just think that people, because I do good work, people are just going to come knock my door and give me the money. It doesn't work like that anymore. You have to have very strong communication. You have to have PR. You have to do all of that. But internally, you have to have very robust systems. You have to think like an entrepreneur. And therefore, only then you can create other enterprises, and entrepreneurship ideas can come to you, and taking that risk. Most nonprofits are very risk averse. And that's where, and even if it's small, they just are so worried. So I think you need to be little bit open to taking risk, no gain.
Yeah, have a little bit of capacity to be able to do that. Maybe some reserves for when a particular investment doesn't go well. But to thoughtfully go into this, we can see the impact and how the investor or the donor has a new way of experiencing the joy of giving. And Neelam Makhijani is the Director of Operations and Strategies for SUVIDHA. And Neelam, thank you so much for teaching us on the Fundraising School's First Day podcast. It's been an absolute delight to learn from you today.
Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you for inviting me here. And I'm also learning as I go through this whole process myself. So we are all in this learning space. Thank you.
You're very kind. And of course, our participants learn through more than 24 courses, leading to 5 different certificates in person in nearly a dozen cities across the United States. And of course, anywhere around the world online, either live through our virtual courses or recorded through our asynchronous courses. We have custom training that we can design especially for you. We have quarterly webinars and, of course, this weekly podcast. All of our information is gathered in our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising. And where can you find this information? Online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. I'm grateful for our producers today, Mike Anthony and Jennifer Boffman. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.